again and welcome to another 7 Sports Special. At this time, over the next 2 weeks, we are looking at the electrifying 80s, the highs and lows of a dynamic decade of football. From fabulous Phil Carman's altercation with boundary umpire Carberry, the Swans move up to Sydney, Peter Pizzusto and the Cracker Boys burst onto the VFL scene. It's all in the electrifying 80s. This week, we'll be looking up to 1984. And joining us in the program later will be the winner of the Norm Smith Medal from the year 1980. Tiger fans will remember that was a big year. Well, let's get straight down to business now and relive some of the game's greatest moments. I'm sure you'll enjoy the electrifying 80s.
It was a summer of discontent at Princes Park when Carlton President George Harris and Premiership coach Alex Jesaulenko departed after bitter infighting. But in came popular ruckman Peter Jones as coach, and the Blues started the 1980 season defending their 1979 title in deep enemy territory. Almost 30,000 fans squeezed into Victoria Park, and they saw the Blues do it again, this time with Wayne Johnston kicking 7 goals. Johnston and Carlton simply dominated. Meanwhile, Jesaulenko had packed his bags and joined the battling Saints, initially as a player. But after 2 rounds, St Kilda sacked Mike Patterson and asked Carlton's favourite son to step in. He was 34, but Jesaulenko had lost none of that magic. The Saints drew their first game under Jesaulenko, but in round 4 they met Essendon in a game fans still talk about a decade later. And not just because Crackers Keenan got himself a little confused. Fiery Phil Carman was in hot water over this incident with boundary umpire Graham Carberry.
Talking, oh, did you see that one? Did you see that one?
The net result was a 20-week suspension for the Bombers star, the biggest sentence handed out in the 1980s.
You know, I think now I'll be, I didn't know last night what I'd do. I didn't know whether I'd give it away or not, but I think it's probably making me a little bit more determined to retain my fitness and hopefully play some sort of game towards the end of the year.
When did the enormity of the suspension hit you, this morning or last night when you're driving home to Lilydale?
I don't know whether it's really hit me yet. You know, I just know that I'm not playing Saturday and it's going to be some time before I do.
It was the year of the Tigers and their young goal-kicking champion Michael Roach. In round 7, he was on fire against Footscray, putting 11 in Richmond's 110-point win.
16 goals. Very, very close. The umpire says yes. Goal to Michael Roach. Goal number 11.
The VFL's decision to resurrect the night series during the 1970s had been a winner, and it proved an exciting alternative to the day competition. But of all the night games, who will forget the 1980 Grand Final and North Melbourne's controversial goal after the siren? North's Kerry Good accepted a pass from Malcolm Blight, and the poor old Magpies were jinxed again.
Good kicks this goal. They've won the match. Oh, what a climax to this 1980 Escort Cup Grand Final. Good's already kicked 3 goals. He's only about 25 to 30 metres out, dead in front. He kicks this, they've won the game. He's put it through and North Melbourne have premiers. North Melbourne have won the match. What a game! I don't think I've ever seen anything like it in my life.
John Rantel's career was given the kiss of life in 1980 after being dumped by South Melbourne. And the former Swans and North Melbourne defender broke Kevin Murray's league record of 333 games in round 7. 3 games later, Rantel called it a day. The goal of the year featured the acceleration and skill of Geelong wingman Michael Turner.
He's well shepherded there by one. Runs around another tackle. Turner goes goal. It's across the face, maybe. It's a beautiful goal from Turner. Magnificent football.
Meanwhile, Roach was continuing his goal-kicking spree with pinpoint accuracy. And in round 20, the former Tasmanian booted 9 goals against Melbourne to register his century. The Tigers celebrated with a 10-goal win, but the following week they tangled with North, and veteran Francis Burke came off second best in this collision. But they breathed them tough in Tigerland, and Burke went to the forward line with blood streaming from a deep cut. He helped Richmond to victory with inspiring play like this.
Well, isn't he a marvel, this guy? God, I don't know who's going to see the goals. Look at the blood just oozing out of his forehead. He is a marvel, this guy, and if he kicks this goal, he'd be an inspiration to the team from about 15 metres out on a slight angle. Let's see what he can do with this. He's had to be shifted away from fullback after getting that knock before he fires, and he's put it through for a
To the marks of the year, and the league's high flyers were soaring. John Roberts,
Up towards their half forward. Following that mark, brought in by Roberts.
Ken Sheldon,
Kick down towards Glendinning again. Oh, what a magnificent mark down there to Sheldon.
Graham Teasdale,
Teasdale, magnificent.
Robert Flower, Paul Jeffries, Darryl Sutton,
Great. Beautiful mark there by Sutton.
Peter Dacos,
for Dacos, and what a beautiful mark for Dacos.
and the best of them, Graham Teasdale again.
Oh, look at that magnificent mark.
1980 also saw the departure of Carl Dittrich after 16 seasons with St Kilda in Melbourne. Big Carl played 285 games, and he was not going to let Kevin Morris forget about his last.
There, Morris and Dittrich wrestling. Dittrich pulls Morris's hair. It's on now. Big Carl in the thick of things is playing.
Another veteran, Richmond's Kevin Bartlett, chalked up one of the many milestones during the 1980s when he set the new record for the most number of games. And Bartlett knew where those goals were.
To play on. Jewell giving chase. The shot by Bartlett. Goes straight for a beautiful goal.
Peter Jones and Tony Jewell could not agree on the scores, or something, on qualifying final day.
Almost came to blows. Well, that's unusual when the two respective coaches get into loggerheads.
But the Tigers and Bartlett just rolled on, with Bartlett booting 8 of Richmond's 14 in the second semi-final against Geelong. The Cats went to the preliminary final, but this time Peter Dacos and Ronnie Wearmouth haunted them in a thriller.
That's a goal! Collingwood come back. Stewart, Wearmouth runs in the goal. Could be another one for the Magpies. It is! And is he happy?
On Brownlow Medal night, there were few surprises. Kelvin Templeton had been the outstanding player of the season at centre-half forward for Footscray and became the first key forward to win the coveted prize. The Magpies became the first side to reach the grand final via the elimination final. But their tired legs were no match for the Tigers or that man Bartlett. It was Richmond by a record margin of 81 points, and the experts were predicting the Tigers would be the powerhouse of the 1980s.
Well-directed one, but it does find Robert Wiley eventually, who fires at the goals. Wait for the goal umpire. That's a miraculous kick from Wiley. Jimmy Jess into the goal square.
But who would have thought some, like David Cloak, would later change stripes? And for Bartlett, the joy of 1980 was to turn sour as coach of the young, struggling Tigers in the late 1980s.
And then is Bartlett 6 goals.
Still, Tiger fans can live in the glory of special moments like this one, when Bartlett left Stan Magro and the Magpies in his wake.
Coming around the boundary line, going for goal number 7. What's the result?
They lifted Tony Jewell high and went off to celebrate their 10th premiership and the first of a new decade. '81 was a year of change. Even before the season had started, Ron Barassi had returned to Melbourne after 16 seasons. Kevin Sheedy, Robert Walls and Malcolm Blight started their coaching careers. David Parkin took the Carlton job, and Alan Jeans replaced Parkin at Hawthorn. It was also the year Carlton dug deep into the vast riches in Western Australia and came up with 2 overnight stars, a fiery but flamboyant customer called Peter Busasto, and the quietly spoken but highly efficient Ken Hunter. With teamwork like this, they combined to leave their mark on the opening round, and reigning premiers Richmond.
So fires the hand pass to Wells. Wells running into goal. He'll have a shot and he's done it again.
Lee Matthews spoiled Barassi's homecoming in round 1, helping himself to 11 goals at the MCG.
It's a goal. 11 goals for Lee Matthews.
Jeff Ferring was not the biggest name in football, but he produced the biggest and straightest kick of the decade in round 3 against Collingwood.
Kick from Ferring to full forward. What a goal!
But at Carlton, everyone was in raptures about Busasto and his aerial feats.
Screws it back towards the half-forward position. Busasto, number 2.
Everyone, that is, except Jack Dyer, who thought Busasto was a good, ordinary player. Well, Busasto kicked 8 goals in this game against South Melbourne, so we'll let you decide.
Been sensational. Not bad for a very ordinary player. I hope Jack Dyer watches.
The Doug Cox affair was the first of several major clearance wrangles of the 80s, resulting in the bitter dispute between St Kilda and Richmond. But the Saints and Cox took up the challenge, and despite the loss of premiership points hanging over their head, Cox led St Kilda out in round 9 against the Tigers before he made an early exit with concussion. Collingwood went to the top of the ladder in round 10 thanks to a young magician by the name of Peter Dacos. This was one of his 9 goals for the afternoon.
Put it through for another goal for the Magpies.
They were celebrating down at Cardinia Park following the long-awaited arrival of East Fremantle champion Brian Peake, who packed his Sandover medal and his bags to join the Cats in June. Peake arrived in Geelong by helicopter, pulled on his new jumper and made his presence felt immediately. He was part of the Cats side which destroyed North Melbourne by 114 points. Poor old North could not take a trick. Just ask Malcolm Blight, who lost his bearings a week later at the MCG.
I think he might have put that through for a point. He's run the wrong way. It's unbelievable. He thought that was the goals. He really still thinks it now. Look, it is unbelievable because I was done better myself.
The forerunner to the VFL's expanded competition was the decision to play interstate matches in Brisbane and Sydney in 1981. The Hawks and the Bombers slugged it out under the Gabba sun, and some, like Hawthorn's Robert Domenico, got more than they bargained for.
Simon Madden, our
Oh,
Hawthorn
there's
player,
one down.
And he's reported, I would say.
Ronnie Andrews dropped him like a sack of spuds.
got him all right.
He's got him. You're gone this time, Ronnie boy.
In the middle of 1981, you might recall, our cricketers were having a torrid time in England at the hands of one Ian Botham. Well, back home, North fans were hailing Malcolm Blight as their Ian Botham after his decision to stand down as playing coach in round 16. The following week, with Barry Cable at the helm, Blight stepped out and let fly with 11 goals against Footscray.
He's kicked 6. Here's number 7. No mistake about.
Meanwhile, Essendon was getting its act together under Kevin Sheedy, and in the night grand final of 1981, they found some inspiration from Tim Watson just when they needed it most. And did those Essendon fans love it?
And he's put it through. Oh, what an opportune comment. Listen to the crowd. Listen to that crowd.
The Bombers lost 5 of their first 6 games. But when they met Carlton at Princes Park in round 20, they were aiming for their 14th straight win. The Blues and Jim Buckley were in great touch. But when Carlton skipper Mike Fitzpatrick tried to slow things down, they paid the penalty.
Under a crowd, and he's probably been the best man on the ground. He's taking it off. He's been wasting time. Well, he can do that, yes.
Essendon turned to young champion Neil Danaher for some last-minute heroics, and the Bombers got up by a point.
It could be the dress rehearsal for the grand final of 1981 as Neil Danaher comes in for the kick that could possibly win the game. And he's put it through and the Bombers have hit the front.
But all good things must come to an end. And in the final round of the season, the Bombers were relegated to the elimination final when the determined Cats, fired by Terry Bright, grabbed the double chance.
Bright kicks his second, takes Geelong to 6-13, 49. Essendon 6-10, 46.
1981 produced possibly the zaniest man we have seen on the football field. Melbourne full forward Mark Jackson. To everyone, he was simply Jacko. And as Hawthorn fullback Kelvin Moore discovered in round 22, there is only one Jacko. Now, just what was that message Jacko was trying to pass on to Kelvin?
Goodness.
Oh dear. He is a one-man show down there. He's as happy as Larry, kicked his first goal, and he has told about 15,000 people in no uncertain manner.
The marks of the year. Michael Roach. Peter McConville.
On the ground, though. The mark of the day.
Peter Basasto.
Kick Bazasto flies. Oh, how was that? What a mark by Bazasto.
Simon Madden.
Simon Madden.
What a magnificent mark.
McConville again. And Michael Roach.
Could be 8 straight notes. Look at that goal.
Ricky Barham.
At the back.
And that man Basasto.
Sailing norwards into... Oh, that's Basasto, mark of the year.
Yes, it was the mark of the year. But Basasto took the double with this piece of play for goal of the year.
Has a snapshot at goal and has put it through. What an amazing goal.
The final started with Essendon hot favourites against Fitzroy in the elimination final. But the Lions, led by courageous Gary Wilson, had other ideas, winning by 15 points. With Carlton through to the grand final, it was down to Collingwood and Geelong on preliminary final day. But the Magpies and Rene King were determined to put Geelong down for the count. Somehow, the Cats had left Gary Sidebottom behind in Geelong. But they couldn't catch anything that day, the bus or Peter Dacos. And the Magpies were into their third successive grand final.
Collingwood hit the lead. 4 goals to Dacos.
Part of the big build-up to the grand final included the first tie in the Brownlow medal since 1905. Fitzroy's Bernie Quinlan and South Melbourne's Barry Round took friendship all the way, each winning a medal after the league decided to scrap the countback system. Once again, the VFL could not have asked for a better draw card. Carlton versus Collingwood in the grand final. The Magpies were desperate to break their premiership jinx, and for a while it appeared as though Ricky Barham and Dacos would end the drought. But the Blues hit back, and as Wayne Johnson found, everything was bouncing their way. And if Wayne Harms had haunted Collingwood in 1979, he was back to do it again in 1981 with brilliant football like this.
Shot for goal. This will be a long one. It's a beautiful goal by Wayne Harms.
Great goal. Beautiful kick. Oh, what a great mark for Harms. Mark of the day by a mile.
Harms sparked his teammates into action. First, it was Jim Buckley.
Handball. Buckley lines them up. Steadies on its way. And it's a goal. Carlton now coming back.
Then Ken Sheldon.
Points the difference. There's a go now for Sheldon. A hurried shot for goal. He's put it through. 4 points the difference now.
Sheldon's second goal.
Before Rod Ashman said goodnight to the Magpies and season 1981.
Carlton hit the front in the final term.
There's a feeling in the city, they're talking in the town. Today we're making history, and we won't let you down. We're Swans and we are Sydney, we'll set the town alight. Get ready for the liftoff, this bird is taking flight.
And so, it was welcome to football Sydney style. They started life in 1874 as South Melbourne, but 106 years later, they were shipped from the Lake Oval to the Harbour City and Australia's rugby stronghold. It was the end of an era for South, and there was much bitterness and controversy over the move. But it signalled the start of a new team, the Sydney Swans. Their first match was against Melbourne, and here's one for the trivia buffs. Who kicked the Swans' first goal in Sydney? The goal umpire might not have had it quite right, but Colin Hounsell was claiming full points as the Swans went on to the first of many wins in Sydney.
Melbourne one behind, 1 point in the first quarter.
Back in Victoria, North Melbourne unveiled the much-heralded Cracker Brothers with stunning results. Jimmy made his mark on the game in the first 10 seconds against Richmond.
McCann couldn't complete the mark.
And brother Phil was no slouch either, particularly when it came to finding Jimmy.
Goal is good. That is the Cracker Boys in action.
When co-tenants Hawthorn and Carlton clashed at Princes Park in round 4, there were no big pardons, as Ken Hunter discovered. But the Blues picked themselves off the ground, and with Rod Ashman running riot, they booted 10 goals in the third quarter to win by 61 points and take a place in the 5. Ashman was inspirational and was the start of a Carlton resurgence, which continued well into the season.
Out the back to Ashman. Could be another goal for Ashman. And there's another goal.
It was the Swans' turn in round 9, and the Sydney Siders were powerless to stop a 12-goal onslaught from Carlton in the opening term.
Swans coach Ricky Quaid.
Look, I tell you what, Wells should have lost that, but it bounced back for him. It's unbelievable. It's another goal, Pete.
12 for the quarter, kicked by Jimmy Buckley.
Even the Swans' fullback Rod Carter was looking for a breather.
Football here at Princes Park.
By now, the Jacko show was gathering momentum and becoming more outrageous by the week. At Windy Hill, this tangle with Essendon's Ronnie Andrews earned Jacko a 2-week suspension and set up a return bout in the boxing ring. When Fitzroy rover Gary Wilson collected Richmond strongman Jim Jess, he proved the old adage, the bigger they are, the harder they fall. Both sides dished it out. Brad Gotch collected Wayne Shand, and Mick Conlon seemed to lose his way, trying to get past Richmond's Mick Malthouse. In a high-scoring game, the Tigers had Brian Taylor on target with 10 goals. But Tigers fans did not get to see much of Taylor, who was standing in for the injured Michael Roach. Two full forwards just did not go into one, and Taylor later joined the exodus of players from Punt Road to Collingwood. The Swans have always promised they'd fly a premiership flag off the Sydney Town Hall, and they came to VFL Park in July determined to take home the 1982 night grand final against North Melbourne. With play like this from Silvio Fascini, the cup was theirs.
The Swans looking good now, so is that Escort Championship Cup.
Little wonder their jubilant captain Barry Round had a smile from ear to ear. In round 18 at Windy Hill, Lee Matthews went some way to proving who was the best and toughest player in league football. While Alan Jeans urged his charges on, Matthews took out his frustration on the behind post with stunning results.
He's hit it and broke the point post. Oh, talk about a he-man. How was that? He split it right down in half. A fantastic effort by Lee Matthews.
But there were few objects that got in Matthews' way that year, as Melbourne's Peter Giles could testify after this incident in round 21. It appeared there were one or two Melbourne players intent on evening the score, but this was well before trial by video had started.
See for yourself. A little bit of fireworks here at the MCG.
There weren't many players who stood in Mick Conlon's path when he was charging his way to goal. This magnificent show of strength and skill earned the Fitzroy Ford Goal of the Year.
And he's just about made the distance. That's a goal. What a brilliant...
The Mark of the Year had the usual contenders: Paul van der Haar, Trevor Barker, Jeff Rains,
Rollins, Hunter and Rains. Long
Michael Tuck,
the goal square. Tuck will be the flyer for Hawthorn.
Simon Madden,
Get the ball moving. Madden up high.
Malcolm Blight,
Forward line for North Melbourne. Beautiful mark to Malcolm Blight.
Tuck ruck roving.
Gary Buckenara,
Ball back. Field puts the ball.
Blight,
Trying to find Carmen up.
and Buckenara again.
Buckenara, another great mark.
Ken Hunter.
Up towards the half-forward line. That's Hunter. How about that for a mark?
But it was Rains high over David McMahon for the top mark of 1982. The final started on a winning note for Carlton against Hawthorn in the qualifying final. But there was one sour note when Wayne Johnston was outed for 2 weeks in this incident with David Polkinghorne.
So Blight is going for his 100th goal.
It was a day for the old and the new at the MCG in the first semi-final. Malcolm Blight was on 99 goals when he lined up on the quarter-time siren, aiming to become only the second North Melbourne player behind Doug Wade to register 3 figures.
As hard as they thought. Blight going for his 100. He's kicked it after the siren at quarter time.
His shot sailed through, as did 5 from a hawk in the number 47 Guernsey making his VFL debut, Dermot Brereton.
Goes forward and he's put it through. Another goal kicked by Dermot Brereton, his 5th goal, and he certainly made his mark this afternoon.
The Brownlow medal produced a minor upset. Brian Wilson, who'd been rejected by Footscray and North Melbourne, became the first Melbourne player to win football's top individual award since Don Cordner in 1946. David Parkin's Blues were aiming for back-to-back flags when they lined up against Richmond on Grand Final Day. Richmond, under Francis Burke, had defeated Carlton in the second semi-final. And although tempers were a little frayed, the Blues settled down and were looking good.
Lear into it. Jones has had his number taken. There's another go. Sheldon's into it too with the Rains. Well, I think the Tigers...
Ken Hunter felt the full force of Jim Jess, and for a while it seemed he didn't know what day of the week it was.
That day. And the Tigers are concentrating on using the shoulder rather than going after the ball. And we find the umpire will call it.
His replacement, Robert Klump, fared a little better. But Hunter was soon back on his feet to cap off this fine mark by Peter Busasto.
He goes for a hand pass to Hunter. It could be a goal coming.
The Tigers could not take a trick, and the luckless Bruce Tempany came off second best in this collision, resulting in a broken arm.
James Carlton kicking in danger, I'd say, as we...
You could be right. As you said, he certainly has had a bad run with it.
The Blues made the most of Richmond's misfortune, and when Alex Marcoux sealed the Tigers' fate in the final term, Carlton had the 1982 premiership sewn up.
Kim Basinger, beautiful star of
Electrifying 80s, one of the stars of the 80s, joins us now. He is now the Richmond coach, but in 1980 we saw those gold flowing locks running down the forward line, kicking goals. Kevin Bartlett, welcome.
Thanks, Sandy. Great to be here.
Where are the locks?
They're gone. But I just thought I'd move with the times because most kids have short haircuts these days, so I'm just going with the times.
Kevin, we look back to those tremendous highlights from 1980, 81 and 82 we've had a look at so far. We're now moving into the 90s. How do you think the game's changed over that decade?
Well, I think the beginning of the 80s, of course, Richmond won the premiership, and I think there was a lot of rebound football, tremendous amount of skill came into the game, I think, particularly in the 80s, and I think that the game is just progressing from that. I think a lot of the players have become bigger, more athletic. There's a lot more emphasis now on players doing weights and building up, and, you know, the skill level, there's a lot of emphasis now put on the skill level, and we saw Hawthorn today, for instance, you know, with their great skill level winning today. So I think the change has been just particularly in the areas of skill and the physical attributes of players.
Not from a coach's point of view, but from a spectator's point of view, despite the changes, is the game heading in the right direction?
Well, I think it is. I mean, things are changing. A lot of people say that the collisions are not there like they were, say, in the 60s. But that's simply because the ball has moved so quickly now, and players, you know, are capable of running from full back down, kicking a goal, things that were unheard of, you know, in the 60s and maybe even in the very, very early 70s. So I think it's a pretty exciting brand of football in a different sort of way.
You have featured in Holden's greatest 25 since 1965. We're counting down to number 1. Who's the greatest player that you ever played against? Against or with? Either.
Either? Well, naturally enough, I look at a number of Richmond players because we played in a golden era with, you know, Ian Stewart's and Francis Burke's, Billy Barrett's, Kevin Sheedy's, all great players. But I would have to say that Royce Hart was just an exceptional player, played at centre-half forward. He wasn't over big Royce, but he was a great mark. He was fantastic on the ground, great recovery skills and a magnificent kick, and, you know, it'd be very difficult for me to go past Royce. Briefly in closing, optimistic about the future for the Tigers next year? Well, I'm optimistic about the future, not only next year, but in the years beyond that. We're confident that we've got a nucleus of players and a plan to do well. Kevin, thank you for joining us tonight. Stay with us now for your final year. It was 1983.
It was football in March as the Blues unfurled their 1982 flag to start one of the most controversial seasons in VFL history.
Flag is unfurled. A cheer goes up from the Carlton stand. 1983 VFL season is underway at Princes Park.
The rematch of the previous year's grand finalists was another triumph for Carlton. This time the Blues downed Richmond by 10 goals. At the MCG, the game's best-known rivals, Melbourne and Collingwood, were unveiling their high-priced and new-look lineups. Brownlow medalist Peter Moore had swapped jumpers and was now a demon, together with another medal winner, Kelvin Templeton. While Moore was quickly on the scoreboard for Melbourne, it was Collingwood's interstate brigade, guided by new coach John Cale, who led the Magpies to victory, with goals like this to first gamer Mike Richardson.
As the imports lift and Richardson goals.
Essendon travelled to Sydney the following day, and a lanky young forward in the number 3 Guernsey played his first game. Was this the promise of things to come from Paul Salmon? But the Swans defied all logic when they fought back twice in the dying moments with only 13 fit men to clinch an unlikely victory. It was a behind from the injured Greg Smith which sealed the game.
So the Swans lead by that margin.
Can they hang in there? Punched away again. Going through his Cruz. Out to Vernon. That's a siren.
And were those Swans players happy?
The final scores. We see the scores now. 79-111. The Swans to West Western 15-20, 110.
St Kilda sent shockwaves through the competition when it obtained a clearance for former Swans rover Silvio Fascini via the courts on the eve of round 4. But no one was quite prepared for the year's biggest sensation. The Saints played ex-Swan Paul Morwood without a clearance against Geelong.
Starting slow there now, so you can go one club one week and another the next week. We're not on contract, so make some brass out of that one.
Hawthorn and Essendon were flexing their muscles near the top of the ladder in round 8, with Hawk wingman Robert Di-Domenico right in the thick of things. This collision with Essendon's Alan Stoneham led to a half-time dust-up and another tribunal appointment for Di-Domenico.
I think I nominated this before, about halfway through the first quarter. This could be on. They're still at it now. Di-Domenico, there's a bloke down there. Who is it? Stoneham.
Essendon and Stoneham looked a sorry lot at half-time. But after the interval, it appeared the Bombers had some scores to settle, and Lee Matthews seemed to lose his bearings.
Against Andrews, I would say, no. He's still not the best in the world because he can't stand up too good.
Now Ronnie Andrews clapping his hands, and he's got a grin from ear to ear.
North Melbourne scored a 111-point win over Carlton in round 10 with goals like this from Ross Glendinning.
This kick, what a magnificent goal! Oh, what a ripper! What a beautiful goal!
But 3 weeks later, the Roos went down by a staggering 150 points with some sheer brilliance from Matt Rendell.
He's brought around beautifully and put it through.
Carlton and Richmond obviously meant business in the night grand final. Or was Peter Bosustow just staging? Wayne Johnston captained Carlton that night, and with Wayne Harms and Rod Ashman combining well, the Blues added another trophy to their cabinet. Johnston accepted the trophy and gave the football world a big grin, complete with mouthguard.
The cheer squatters. Kevin Bartlett comes onto the ground for his 400th game of VFL football.
And so it was game number 400, and another milestone for Richmond legend Kevin Bartlett when he led the Tigers out against Collingwood in round 19. The first player to reach 400 games.
What a tribute did Kevin Bartlett have than to see a crowd like that?
The Lions were celebrating in round 21 when Bernie Quinlan became the first Fitzroy full forward to boot 100 goals in a season. Quinlan's trademark, the long drop punt, sailed through to give him a century and the Lions' second place on the league ladder.
Long, it's there! It's 100! 100 goals to Bernie Quinlan, and here they come in their thousands.
Essendon showed plenty of cheek in the elimination final when the Bombers took it right up to Carlton with goals like this to Tony Bahagia.
16 points the difference now. I think I might back Clayton. He seems to be pretty handy, that guy. Got a couple of victories this year.
Dools lost his headband.
Cameron Clayton seemed to take a liking to Bruce Dools' headband, even if the Blues didn't.
Taking the headband off.
Yes, Kevin Apple tried that in the night match here a few years ago, and Dool went berserk.
Like taking it.
But Bahagia decided he'd better tidy things up, and away went the headband, straight over the fence.
Over the fence, Bahagia. Well, they got the Blues by the throat at the moment.
Essendon marched into the preliminary final and gave North Melbourne a football lesson, starting with Terry Danaher's goal in the first minute before Bill Duckworth let one fly from inside the centre square.
Duckworth favours the torpedo punt kick, a mammoth kick into the goal square, and it's a goal!
Arnold Bridus also appeared to let one fly, as Glenn Hawker discovered. But at the other end of the ground, the Bombers and Tim Watson were having the last laugh.
Watson, who steadies. Watson's shot, it's through, and once again Essendon answered the challenge.
The marks were spectacular as always. Wayne Bettison. Peter Bosustow.
Oh, over the top, Bosustow. Back to the centre circle.
Dermot Brereton.
Beautiful mark.
Gary Pert.
Oh, what a great mark.
Gotta watch the centre.
Another from Bosustow.
Oh, there's a Bosustow again. He's already kicked by.
Be looking up there, no doubt.
Darryl Cunningham.
Oh, that is Darryl Cunningham, was it?
Graham Hinchin.
Turning
Peter Knights.
Trying to win this game as the ball goes out. It's a great mark to Peter Knights.
Peter Smith.
Back. What a fly by Smith. Golly, he's come down pretty heavy that time.
Bernie Quinlan.
Quinlan! Bernie Quinlan.
And the best and most courageous, Ken Hunter.
Well, they didn't see him, but there's a fine mark caught in for Carlton by Hunter.
It was another Brownlow medal for North Melbourne, with Ross Glendinning following in the footsteps of North's previous winners, Keith Gregg and Malcolm Blight. Essendon made it to the grand final for the first time since 1968. And for a while it looked as though luck would favour the Bombers when Hawthorn's Gary Buckenara went down early in the game.
Oh, down he goes. He's in all sorts of trouble, Buckenara. What a blow for Hawthorn.
The Hawks teamed magnificently through Rodney Eade and Loveridge, before Essendon's hero Tim Watson took a solid knock which seemed to fire up the Bombers as their star lay dazed on the ground behind play.
There it is behind play. And Watson's still in the hands of the trainer. Looking
in the air or on the ground, Matthews and the Hawks simply could not miss.
Oh, what a grab from the skipper. Kick from Wallace, looking for Matthews. Bird, oh, beautiful one-hander, just not completing it enough. Matthews, a shot at goal. That's a chance. Lethal's done it.
Colin Robertson was too elusive for the Bombers, and not only did he help set up Hawthorn's win, he took out the Norm Smith medal.
Up to Matthews, he picks it up, yes. And the mark paid to the Hawthorn skipper.
Finally, the slaughter became too much for Essendon fans, who decided to make an early exit. But the Hawks were not finished, and Loveridge accepted a gift from Simon Madden to add further insult to injury.
And there we see Loveridge firing the goals. And I think he's put it through, he has. There's the goal. We see
the final siren rang. An 83-point victory for the Hawks, giving Alan Jeans his second premiership and Hawthorn its fifth. Warren Ralph. With the Blues blitzing North Melbourne by 137 points, they found Ralph was only too willing.
And it's right through the centre.
At Moorabbin, St Kilda and Essendon fans saw the promise of things to come in the shape of their respective full forwards. Paul Salmon stood out like a beacon in front of goal for Essendon, and 18-year-old Tony Lockett was on his way to stardom for St Kilda with strong play like this.
Teammate, yes! Another great pass. Oh, Tony Lockett. Long.
Salmon, almost overnight, became the darling of the Essendon horde, and he could do no wrong. Suddenly, there were comparisons with John Coleman as he marked and kicked everything.
Again, one hit by Salmon. What a wonderful mark.
On the playing field, there is nothing to rival a Collingwood-Carlton clash. And at VFL Park on Anzac Day, the old rivals turned on a game to remember. The Magpies were on fire early through Bruce Abernathy, and then Mark Williams. But Carlton had the chance to pinch the game on the siren with a controversial free kick to Ralph.
It's a free kick. It might go there to Ralph. They got him on the side of the head, so this could level the scores. It could be a drawn game.
What time to give a decision?
Oh, and all the players there. Look at the Collingwood players in the goal square trying to put him off. Can he kick this one to make it a draw? Look at all those Collingwood players. He fires.
He's got it, I think.
He's missed it.
And when the Carlton spearhead missed his shot, Magpie supporters believed justice had been done. It was almost the final chapter in the controversial career of St Kilda's Robert Muir against Carlton at Princes Park in round 6. This clash with former St Val Perovic earned Muir a 12-week suspension. But the immediate sequel saw umpire Kevin Smith struggling to come to grips with the fiery wingman. Muir apparently thought he was hard done by and took out his frustrations in no uncertain manner.
It's a hand pass towards McKenna now.
When Michael McLean put Footscray 1 point down against Collingwood in round 10, the Magpies and defender Graham Allen decided to play safe, a decision which had disastrous consequences. Simon Beasley accepted the pass.
Beasley has the chance of putting the Dogs in front.
Jim Edmund reminded Allen of his costly mistake, and the Bulldogs went on to win by 5 points.
Beasley, the chance of being a hero for Footscray. And Collingwood may have thrown this one away as Beasley now from directly in front. Puts the Dogs in front. 4 goals to Simon Beasley.
While Salmon's goal-kicking feats were winning rave reviews, Geelong had unearthed a former Hawthorn player with little fuss or fanfare. But on this day against Richmond, Ablett showed just what a match winner he can be.
So to Ablett, he's kicked one, he's kicked another one. Gary Ablett's going to win this game for the Cats.
It seemed nothing was going to stop Salmon and the Bombers that year, and everything was going along nicely for the young giant, until a collision with Collingwood's Jeff Rains buckled his knee and ended prematurely what could have been a 100-goal season.
Now Salmon is down at centre field.
Salmon down, he hasn't moved for a while, Pete. He's really stunned down there.
Oh!
Melbourne and Essendon met head-on at VFL Park in round 14, and both sides were on the receiving end, before they decided to settle it the old-fashioned way.
Bit of trouble as he downs.
I think you'd call it a square-off, wouldn't you, Lou?
There they are all bouncing in now. You just try and sort that one out yourself.
The Demons tried safety first, but as fullback Stephen Smith discovered, that didn't work either.
No, it's not. It'll be a goal by Houston. It'll be a goal. What a beautiful play. Oh, Smith thought he did the right thing.
Anyway,
something must have been upsetting Melbourne coach Ron Barassi, and whatever he was saying did not go down well with defender Shane Zantuck.
Zantuck and Barassi are having a go. The players are pushing Zantuck away from him. Barassi's white down there in the face, but they had a real go, and I'm not kidding. The players had to push Zantuck away. He's wanting to go back and have a go at him again.
Very interesting.
Zantuck very upset about it.
Bernie Quinlan was a popular man with Fitzroy's faithful after he registered 100 goals for the second successive year, doing it in style against St Kilda at the Junction Oval.
And now the kids around the boundary line. Quinlan lines up. Goal number 100 to Bernie Quinlan. His teammates rush in to celebrate. A great moment with him, and second season in a row. He's done that. The second season in a row. He's guided Fitzroy into the finals.
There were 7 major contenders for Mark of the Year. Stephen Eck, Gary Pert, Ken Hunter,
Oh, there's a great mark to Hunter.
Warwick Capper,
Oh, there's Capper again. How about that? Oh, what a beauty.
Dennis Banks,
Keeps it up high.
Michael Reeves.
Instead of being in that back and over the back, a great mark taken by Michael Reeves.
But Wayne Carroll took the season's honour with this screamer.
What a mark.
Peter Moore became only the second man after Ian Stewart to win Brownlow medals at 2 different clubs. The Melbourne Ruckman polled 24 votes to win by 3 from David Cloak. When Hawthorn at Carlton tangled in the qualifying final, Lee Matthews quickly put the Hawks on the scoreboard and reminded Rod Austin it was going to be the first of many. 6, in fact. It turned into a fiery contest. Firstly with Matthews going down, then Austin, and finally Brereton.
Oh, here's a Josh swap. 2 of them flattened. And from the Melbourne Cricket Ground, we begin the 1984 VFL Grand Final between Hawthorn and Essendon.
Hawthorn were aiming for back-to-back flags when they met Essendon in the grand final. And with Matthews on target, they made a flying start.
About 30 seconds.
Colin Robertson added another, and it appeared that would set the trend for the rest of the day.
I thought he couldn't miss them there, could he? And a great start by Hawthorn. They want to go.
But Essendon coach Kevin Sheedy reached into his bag of tricks and reorganised the Bombers lineup with stunning results in a 9-goal last quarter. It started with Leon Baker, and the goals just kept coming.
Towards full forward again. Oh, Bradbury, here's the goal. It's only a few points in it. Oh, those 2 goals came up in 2 minutes.
Up it goes there. Baker taps the ball on. Oh, beautiful play. Goes for a goal. And I think they've hit the front. Van der Haar knocked on. There's a go now for Weston. He's put it through for a goal. What a match winner this guy's been at centre-half forward. This premiership was Sheedy's premiership with these tremendous moves on.
Paul Weston and Tim Watson finally sealed the game for Essendon, giving the Bombers their first flag since 1965.
Oh, they're killing them. And Essendon look like winning their first premiership since 1965. 11 goals, 874 Hawthorn. To Essendon, 12 goals, 91. What a performance by Essendon.
Yes, some great memories as we relive some of the highlights and lowlights in the electrifying 80s. From 1980 through until 1984. We certainly hope you've enjoyed the first hour, and don't forget it will continue next Saturday night, 85 through into 89, and we hope you can join us then for more of the Electrifying 80s.
If he misses, Melbourne are in. There's the kick. It's a goal. It's a goal.
Starcevic. Taken by Duckworth. Oh! He got hit by that. Did he get it?
To get clear. Around one, around two. Brilliantly done. Quicker. They are told to be tearing his hair out.
Here is the magician at work. He shoots towards goal. What more can you say?
Hello and welcome again to the Electrifying 80s. Last week, you'll recall, we looked at the highs and lows in the VFL from 1980 through to 84. Well, the following 5 years were also filled with plenty of drama. Remember Collingwood's John Burke at the Lake Oval? And what about the clash of Neville Bruns and Lee Matthews? That's just the tip of the iceberg. The Electrifying 80s? Here we go.
Hawthorn and Essendon had grown to know each other in 1983 and 1984. And it was fitting they started the 1985 season at VFL Park on March 23, a week earlier than the rest of the competition. Hawthorn had lured former All-Australian captain Steve Malaxos from Western Australia, but he turned out to be a disappointment and eventually returned to Perth.
First goal in the VFL. Yes or no? Yes!
One of the most controversial changes of the 1980s was the time-wasting rule. Although it had been used in practice matches, Essendon's Roger Merritt became the first victim when Glenn James reached for the book in this incident.
The new rule comes in.
Friday night football came to the MCG, and Collingwood and North Melbourne fans went to great lengths to get into the packed stadium for the round one clash, even tearing the doors down. Those who made it inside saw Collingwood's Brian Taylor in fine form, leading the Magpies to victory with 7 goals. Gary Ablett had become an overnight star, and with play like this, he took Geelong to an upset win over Hawthorn at VFL Park.
That's goal number 6 to Ablett. And you can just about wrap this game up for Geelong.
North Melbourne built a reputation as one of the most tenacious sides of the 80s, and their record in tight finishes was extraordinary, as Carlton discovered in round 3. After Ross Glendinning moved the Kangaroos closer, David Dwyer marked, and with precious seconds ticking away, he quickly goaled to give North a courageous win.
I think too far out, I think, Jack. It's a long way out. He's going for it very quickly, puts the ball to boot, he kicks it top, he's put it through! He's put it through! David Dwyer kicks that goal, North Melbourne in front. I can't believe it.
The following week, Carlton and Geelong took an obvious dislike to each other before the ball was bounced, leading to a series of ugly incidents. David Rhys-Jones went down for the count, and the fights continued at both ends of the ground. In the aftermath, only one player, Geelong's Paul Jeffries, was reported, and he received a 3-match suspension.
Oh, look at Jack O's up the other end. Oh, he's putting on his own concert. We can't see it. But Jack O at the other end has just gone 3 rounds of shadow boxing, and Jeffries, wearing the 22 Guernsey for Geelong, is having his head ripped off.
Peter Knight started his career against Sergio Silvani, but in his twilight he was pitted against Silvani's son, Stephen. It was a fascinating display of high marking first from young Silvani, but the Hawthorn veteran showed he'd lost none of his spring.
But he's had 19 kicks for the match, Knight, and that's mark number 10 to the Hawthorn veteran.
Nor his ability to contact with the ball.
Long kick by Knight. What a goal!
1985 will be remembered for 2 black days in football. Collingwood ruckman John Burke was reported by 6 umpires and suspended for 10 years following this incident in a reserves match at the Lake Oval against the Sydney Swans. It appeared Burke decided to take his frustration out on the field umpire Phil Waite. He was handed the heftiest penalty by the VFL tribunal in modern history.
Let's have a look at this one on the replay.
Well,
oh boy!
oh,
Did we see right then, Ray?
I thought, actually, when I was, he just whacked the umpire. Hey,
Oh no!
that's unbelievable. is sensational. The umpire has gone down. Now, there are a number of others coming up to talk to him. Surely we've got to get the Collingwood runner out here and get him off the ground for a spell. He wants to be very careful because...
I'd take him off now.
Well, he's got him.
I think you've got to take the boy off.
Very smart.
Definitely. You've got to take the boy off.
He's leaving the ground.
Take him off.
But even bigger news was the report and subsequent court appearance by Lee Matthews in this incident with Geelong's Neville Bruns. The catch rover went down, and it was revealed later he had suffered a broken jaw. For his part, Matthews collected a broken nose. It was a sad blot on the game, and after being charged by the VFL Commission, Matthews had his playing permit cancelled for a month, effectively resulting in a 3-week suspension and missing the night grand final. The Hawthorn skipper was also charged by police and was fined $1,000, later reduced to a 12-month good behaviour bond on an assault charge.
All I'm going to say is, I don't care
This is a disgrace.
I don't care who thinks Jackson can play football. He's virtually started all this.
Andrew Buse gained a reputation as one of the toughest and most elusive rovers in the competition. And on this day against Footscray, he slipped and slithered his way to goal of the year.
Oh, boy! He hooks it back. Don't tell me he's going to score a goal!
Hawthorn went to the night final without Matthews, but the Hawks had enough skill, determination and backup to cover his loss and take the title against Essendon.
Get onto his left foot and have a snapshot and goal. That's not bad. He's stopped it, I think. Oh, wait on the goal umpire. It's through.
Michael Tuck stepped in as captain and was more than happy to take the trophy. The final saw Footscray making its first appearance since 1976. But the first semi-final was a memorable day for Beasley, who booted 7 goals, including his 100th for the season, to take the Bulldogs into the preliminary final.
Beasley going for the ton. Walks in for the kick from about 15 metres out. And there it is, and the crowd go berserk.
Now to the marks of 1985. Although the Bulldogs lost to Hawthorn to miss making the grand final, there was some consolation when former West Australian Brad Hardy got up to win the Brownlow medal.
First quarter on the 7 network of the 1985 VFL Grand Final between Hawthorn and Essendon. I think we can expect some fireworks early.
The Bombers and the Hawks were back again on grand final day, and the experts were right. There were fireworks. This all-in brawl erupted on the outer wing in the first quarter, and players from both sides let out the tension that generally builds up before a grand final. Players fought, wrestled and jostled each other, and it took some time before umpires could restore order.
You'll find the fighters there.
Matthews and Watson.
Look at them piling up. This is the best I've ever seen in a grand final, Bob. I can't recall. Look good. Oh, golly, Peter. Talk about stacks on the mill.
When they did, Essendon recovered magnificently and went on to play some brilliant football. Bill Duckworth was obviously delighted with this goal,
And Billy's pretty happy about it.
while Tim Watson was always on the move.
Pack of players down there and rebounds to Watson. He has a ping.
The only shining light for Hawthorn was Dermot Brereton, who played his heart out for the Hawks in booting 8 goals.
He could get his name in the record books if that's a goal. It is. Good on him. He's broken the record. 8 goals. That's a fantastic effort.
It was a tight first half, but the Bombers ran riot after the half-time break. Alan Izard burned his opponents off their feet.
Burnett has a shot at the goals again. He's done it.
And Mark Harvey was ever the opportunist, as finally the Bombers went on to win by 78 points.
It's a goal. That's his 4th. Or over the half-forward line for Hawthorn. There's the Cyrus Sarah to win the game. And Essendon the premiers for 1985, winning 2 in a row. 26 goals.
While the Bombers celebrated, Hawthorn gave Lee Matthews a fitting farewell to his playing career after 340 games.
Lee Matthews being carried off the ground, almost in tears, I think. 340 games. And receiving a huge round of applause even from the Essendon fans.
Carlton and Hawthorn unveiled some of the finest interstate recruits to come to Victoria in the opening round of the 1986 season. Former West Australian John Dorotich combined with ex-South Australian Stephen Kernahan. And the tall centre-half forward had an immediate impact on VFL football. But it was a small, shaggy-head rover, looking more like Tiny Tim, who made his presence felt. Hawthorn and Carlton had been locked in a battle to gain John Platten's services. But the Hawks were quickly repaid for the trouble they went to in securing South Australia's #1 rover.
Downfield to Bird. He takes the mark into the open goal and the Hawks are on fire.
There had been 6 coaching changes before the start of 1986. But none of the new faces could match the hot gospeling style of Geelong's John Devine. The Cats had lured Devine back from Tasmania to replace Tom Hafey. But when Geelong trailed badly against Fitzroy in round 1, it was obvious Devine wanted to get his message home immediately. The 7th coaching change came in round 4 when Lee Matthews took over from Bob Rose at Collingwood and guided the Magpies to a first-up win over Geelong. While it was a memorable start to Matthews' coaching career, the umpires had a day they'd prefer to forget.
Pushing the back you could ever hope to see. Trump was tackled by Cleve and Collingwood got the free kick. It's unbelievable.
Fitzroy's Michael Reeves had plenty to say after this comical mix-up in round 6, and he just could not get around Richmond full forward Michael Roach. Chris Burton accepted the gift for the Tigers before Reeves set off to give umpire Gavin Dorr his version of the incident. Now, just how many drinks was Reeves ordering?
Look at Reeves run out to the umpire. He's made Carl Lewis look slow.
Goals were something special in this night match between Essendon and North Melbourne at the MCG. And for North's elusive Phil Cracker, there were a couple of gems. If Cracker's 4th goal was brilliant, his next was something else, as he spun around Essendon's Frank Donnell to kick the goal of the year.
Way here from Donnell, left him for dead. Beautiful play. As there's a running shot at goal. He might have got this one. A goal. What a goal. What things down till the trophy zone. Now he'll be okay.
The Sydney Swans had become football's first privately owned team under flamboyant Sydney medico Dr. Geoffrey Edelston. The Swans went on a buying spree, and when they came to Victoria Park in round 13, they were in 2nd place, while Collingwood was outside the 5.
Them in front the first time for the day. There it is on its way. That's not a bad sort of a shot, and the Swans are at the front.
Barry Mitchell got the Swans up by a point in a controversial finish, but the fans were obviously upset as they gave the umpires a hostile farewell.
I think the umpires are getting some curry off the Collingwood supporter, but I don't know why. I thought they let the game go when the pressure was really on, and it was very difficult to make decisions there and get free kicks. So the final score's a great win and a great game.
Hawthorn claimed another flag with a hard-fought win in the 1986 night grand final against Carlton in heavy conditions at VFL Park. The Blues tried valiantly all night, but John Platten's goal in the final quarter sealed the premiership for the Hawks.
He gives it to Platten. A snapshot going pretty close. It'll be a goal. And put down the glasses for the 1986 flag for Hawthorn.
More than 72,000 fans packed the MCG on August 10 for a game with finals atmosphere between Carlton and Collingwood.
40 metres out. Set sail for goal. Try that one on for goal of the day.
Craig Bradley darted around the outer wing to boot the goal of the day. And then came the knockout of the day when Collingwood's Dennis Banks put down David Rees-Jones to win a 3-match suspension.
Still David Fitzroy. At least he's wide awake. Well, I don't know about wide awake, but he's awake.
Fitzroy went into the final round of the season knowing they had to defeat the Sydney Swans to make the 5. In a low-scoring game, Mick Conlon was the man they turned to, and with goals like this, they were through to the elimination final.
Fitzroy have made the finals for 1986. They'll go in 5th position, defeating the Sydney Swans. Great win to Fitzroy.
On the same day, Collingwood's Brian Taylor was aiming to become the first player since Peter McKenna to kick 100 goals in a season for the Magpies. It was a shaky beginning for Taylor, but with a free kick and thousands of fans lining the boundary line, he slotted through his 100th.
Goal number 100.
The drop punt on its way. Here comes the crowd, and he's kicked it. They're coming from everywhere. Brian Taylor is being swamped, but BT has kicked the ton.
Jim Cracker built a reputation as a fiery customer, as Essendon's Mark Harvey discovered.
Still going too.
While this bump by Ross Glendinning on Bill Duckworth enraged Bomber fans.
Glendinning, did he get hit? That was fair, Joe.
But the Kangaroos rubbed salt into Essendon's wounds with Steve McCann's long goal in the final term.
Steve McCann straightens up from 70 metres out. It's a magnificent kick. Oh, boy, what a kick.
And it appeared North coach John Kennedy was particularly keen to let the crowd know just which team had won. And the marks of the year were spectacular as always. It was a miserable day at VFL Park to start the final series, as Essendon and Fitzroy fought out a thrilling elimination final. Len Hawker put the Bombers in front after Gary Pert thought he had marked.
Is through. Now they're in front by a point.
But once again, the Lions showed their fighting spirit, rushing the ball forward to Mick Conlon, who snatched the game in the last couple of minutes with this goal.
Conlon's got it. He could kick a goal to put him in front. He has. They're in front. By a point. And they might have won the game here.
The 1986 Brownlow medal produced a shock result and a tie when Hawthorn's Robert Di Domenico and Sydney Swan centreman Greg Williams polled 17 votes each to share the award. For the first time, Hawthorn and Carlton met in a grand final, and either in the air or on the ground, the Hawks' Gary Buckenara was in great touch. Jason Dunstall showed the promise of things to come with goals like this one.
How did he do that? Snap shot is a goal! Oh, what a ripper!
But Buckenara was virtually unstoppable, displaying his skills from all distances as Hawthorn went from strength to strength.
It's just about there. It has gone through, I think. It's a goal!
The Hawks were in full control through Buckenara and Dermot Brereton, and when Dunstall booted his 6th, they had their 6th VFL premiership safely in their keeping.
Caught out for Dunstall. He's kicked 5 around Dool. Great tackle by Dool, but Dunstall brushes it aside. This might be the one that they needed. And finally they break the ice in the last quarter. 6 goals to Jason Dunstall.
While Hawthorn and Alan Jean celebrated, the Blues saw their games record holder Bruce Dool make a sad exit after 18 seasons and 359 games.
Scoreboard 16-14, 110 to 9-14, 60.
And we'll return to the electrifying 80s shortly, but first a man who came through not only the 80s, but also the 50s, 60s and 70s. I hope I don't make John Kennedy sound too old. Thank you, John, for joining us. The 80s
saw tremendous change in the game. I know the interchange started in 78, but it really came into effect in 80 and other things. Has it all been good for the game?
Oh yes, I think that by and large the changes that have come into the game have been for the game's benefit, and I hope it stays that way, that the changes that are made because of the game itself rather than well, other reasons that can prompt change.
Do you think there perhaps has been an overuse of handball?
Well, it may have appeared that way, and one of the rules that was brought in that after a player gets a free kick, he must kick the ball, which I have some doubts about whether that's working or not, because it seems to me to be against the flow of the game. A player gets the ball, he's under pressure, he's given a free kick, a teammate calls for it, and he naturally hand passes, and it seems a bit harsh to stop a natural inclination on the player's part. But I don't think there's too much handball. I think some sides, well, the good sides have made a feature of it, and it's been an attacking weapon in their armoury.
John, a few years ago, all coaches were asked if they could have one player from another team, who would they take? Yeah. And bearing in mind it was a few years ago, you took Tony Lockett. Did you visualise then a champion?
Oh, there were two things operating. I thought that Tony was a great player, and I thought he would be even better. And also at North, I think we probably, at that stage, it might have been just when Ross Glendinning, we lost Ross, and we could have done with a full forward. But, you know, I think he is a great player, Tony Lockett.
Two quick questions. The best player you've coached?
Well, I've had the privilege of coaching Lee Matthews and Graham Arthur and Wayne Schimmelbusch and Keith Gregg, and I think they're all pretty great players, really.
Right, now let's separate the quartet. The best player you've seen?
Well, I suppose really among the ones, I suppose those players among the ones I've seen most of, and certainly I think they are great players. Among the opposition players, I think I was impressed this year with Kernahan of Carlton. I thought he played a great game in the day they beat us up at Princes Park. I thought he showed a great deal of knowledge of the game, and in the last quarter I thought he sort of just about controlled the game on his own. So I was pretty impressed with that.
John, thank you for your time tonight. Enjoy your semi-retirement at North Melbourne, and we shall return to the electrifying 80s, and the year is 1987.
When the first VFL match was played in 1897, who would have thought less than 100 years later, teams would be based in Brisbane and Perth? But the introduction of the Brisbane Bears and the West Coast Eagles was not the only change in 1987. Channel 7 had lost the VFL's television rights to Sydney-based Broadcom. Eventually, the ABC was given the approval to televise games in 1987. The Bears and the Eagles both started on a winning note, but it was another high flyer, Sydney Swans full forward Warwick Capper, who was winning all the accolades on this day against Richmond.
Long kick down to Morwood. Morwood doesn't get the bounce. Great play by Capper. As he punches it to Morwood, he's got an open goal. Morwood kicks. Capper ducks back. Oh, he's marked it. What a mark!
Capper's acrobatics were obviously not appreciated by Richmond coach Tony Jewell, who was more concerned about the way his side was playing.
Tony Jewell, he doesn't look a very happy man at all.
Since they won the 1964 premiership, Melbourne had spent more than 2 decades in the doldrums. But under John Northey, they started their resurgence in 1987. The first genuine sign that the Demons meant business came in the 1987 night grand final against Essendon, when Melbourne scored a thrilling victory, even without injured skipper Robbie Flower. He had to be content to help Danny Hughes hold the trophy aloft. Tragedy struck for Carlton early in the season when defender Peter Motley was involved in a serious car accident on his way home from training. The former South Australian eventually won his fight for life, but the accident ended a promising football career. There was also a setback for North Melbourne in round 10 when their courageous captain Wayne Schimmelbusch went down clutching his knee against the Sydney Swans. After what seemed a harmless fall, Schimmelbusch was carried off on a stretcher, a premature end to an outstanding career.
It just looks bad, and let's hope it's not, but it's amazing how it happens to champions. It's incredible, that.
Hawthorn travelled to Carrara in round 12, and Jason Dunstall showed he could put them through from any angle, soccering the 6th of 11 goals he kicked that day. Bears forward Jim Edmund earned a hefty 6-week penalty in this clash with Hawthorn's Russell Morris, but the Hawks went on to win by 95 points.
I think Jimmy Edmund might be reported out of this. I think he's out to it.
The Sydney Swans were all the rage as they hit a 3-match winning streak against the Eagles, Essendon and Richmond. The Swans posted scores of 30 goals or more in all 3 games with football like this.
Kappa ducks, weave, dropped it at the last moment. Bad luck, Warwick Kappa. Beautiful head pass to Stevie White by Kappa, and it's another one. This is magnificent football. Good play, Kappa, over to Neagle, smothered off the boot to Mitchell. Mitchell to Kappa. Kappa goal number 5, and I think the Swans are going to kick this 200.
At Moorabbin, they were hailing a new goal-kicking hero, young full forward Tony Lockett, who had taken the VFL by storm with his strength and accurate kicking. In round 19 against Footscray, Lockett booted 8 goals, including his 100th for the season, the first St Kilda player to reach that milestone.
It's a goal! A great effort by the young champ. A beautiful kick, and they're the Saints players protecting Tony Lockett, and the crowd are coming on in their hundreds and thousands.
Melbourne, led by Robbie Flower, stormed home to the finals, and the Demons set the scene for a titanic struggle in round 22, with 3 teams battling to make the 5th spot. The Demons' victory over Footscray came at a cost. Young star Gary Lyon broke his leg, but Ricky Jackson was not going to let Melbourne's chances slip away.
Chance for Jackson. Snapshot for goal. It's good. Online. Melbourne in front.
Geelong needed to defeat Hawthorn at Cardinia Park to deny the Demons, but Jason Dunstall ran hot late in the game to squeeze the Cats out of the 5.
And it's there, and it's the Hawks.
The Swans made the finals for the 2nd successive year, and Warwick Kappa could not stay out of the action. First, he kicked his 100th goal for the season, and then he used Chris Langford's back as a launching pad to take this miraculous mark.
Oh, dear. Oh,
The marks of the year. Jason Dunstall.
Forward, his target, Dunstall. What a great mark. And the Bombers
Roger Merritt.
once again. High Merritt. What a great mark, Roger Merritt.
Kappa for 2 sensational grabs.
Kappa. Oh, one of the marks of the year.
Spent most of the day on the interchange with
And Dunstall again.
On the left foot. What a mark.
Melbourne's brilliant run continued early in the finals, and when the Demons tackled Hawthorn in the preliminary final, the 2 sides turned on a wonderful display of action and drama.
Jackson, he sprints.
The Demons lost their skipper with a shoulder injury in this bone-jarring collision with Robert Di Pierdomenico.
long and runs straight into Di Pierdomenico.
But just when the Demons looked as though they had Hawthorn's measure, in came Gary Buckenara to seal one of the most thrilling preliminary finals in the history of the game with a goal after the siren.
There's the siren, and he's
Buckenara took his shot 15 metres closer after Jim Steins had run across the mark, and when the ball sailed through, the Hawks could not contain their delight.
What pressure on Gary Buckenara. He is a champion. If he kicks this goal, Hawthorn are in the 1987 grand final. If he misses, Melbourne are in. There's the kick. It's a goal. It's a goal. Hawthorn have won with a kick after the siren. What a performance. A magnificent performance this by Hawthorn. Poor old Melbourne. You've got to, the hearts go out to the Melbourne Football Club.
The Hawks had another win 2 days later, when John Platten shared the Brownlow medal in the 2nd successive Brownlow tie, this time with Tony Lockett, who became the first full forward to win the award. Many experts thought Hawthorn had played their grand final against Melbourne the week before, and they were right. It was a warm day, and the Blues were running hot.
The hand pass stabs Goldwood, puts it through.
High, the pressure now on the Hawks. The big fist is away. Here's a goal coming up to the Blues. Into the open goal goes Gleeson, and it's a goal. He's done all.
One of their driving forces was Norm Smith medal winner David Rhys-Jones, who completely blanketed Dermot Brereton and set up goals like this for Mark Nayley.
Meldrum is down there, knocked away, but again no ground support. Nayley just runs away from 3 Hawthorn players. He's going goalward, Mark Nayley. He's put it through.
The Blues were relentless as they brushed aside the Hawks, with captain Stephen Kernahan leading by example.
Gets into the action. He kicks a goal. Is it another one? Yes, goal.
Oh, they're really running hot at the moment.
Carlton won the flag, but their season was far from finished. the Blues travelled to the Oval in London to play North Melbourne in a game they called the Battle of Britain. And it was not hard to see why. Londoners were treated to the best and worst of our game, as the two sides took a distinct dislike to each other. While the game was listed as an exhibition match, the VFL was alarmed over the violence, and subsequently 7 players were charged and faced the tribunal. Alistair Clarkson and Donald McDonald of North, and Carlton trio David Rhys-Jones, Wayne Johnson and Jim Buckley were all suspended. After a year on the sidelines, the big news to start the 1988 season was the return of Channel 7 to televise football.
Football's back on 7, 7's back in action, and all I can say is we're glad they are. Thank you very much.
There were changes too to the night series, which became a pre-season competition. And for the first time since the 1963 Day Premiership, Hawthorn and Geelong met in a grand final.
From 50. Is it there? It is there. Hawthorn hit the front.
The Hawks showed all their experience in a thrilling finish and gave new coach Alan Joyce a successful start after he was called in to replace Alan Jeans, who was forced to take a year off football. There were significant changes in Brisbane over summer, but the biggest coup was the signing of high-priced full forward Warwick Kappa from the Sydney Swans.
Long into the forward line, Williams in best position to mark. It runs free behind. Kappa running into an open goal. Great tackle, but he kicks it.
Full forwards were in the news back in Melbourne, and St Kilda's Tony Lockett landed himself in trouble in this incident with Fitzroy's Grant Laurie. Under a tougher tribunal system, Lockett was suspended for 3 weeks. A week later, St Kilda lost Jeff Cunningham for more than half the season after a nasty clash of heads at the SCG. Rod Grinter's crude tackle on Terry Wallace earned him a 6-week suspension after being trialled by video. Geelong's Gary Ablett turned on his own show at the MCG on Anzac Day, kicking 10 goals against Richmond. But the goal of the year belonged to North Melbourne ruck rover Matthew Larkin, who left the West Coast Eagles in a spin under the MCG lights in round 6.
He snaps it! Oh, he's kicked it! Play of the night!
There were plenty of exciting finishes in 1988, and young Geelong rover Robert Scott had all the pressure on his shoulders with this shot against the Sydney Swans after the siren.
The siren has sounded, and the youngster knows 4 premiership points are hanging on this. John Devine is up out of his seat.
Poor kid, poor kid.
Let's see what he can do. Tremendous pressure, a difficult angle. The distance not a problem. The kick is a beauty. Hit the post. I think it's hit the post. It hit the post. Sydney have won. Sydney have won.
At least Scott had a clear shot at goal. Footscray's Simon Beasley found more than the usual quota of men on the mark when he lined up for this kick against the Brisbane Bears in round 7.
He comes in now, steadying his approach. He falters. No doubt the crowd getting in his way, and it's going to make it tough. It's going to make it tough for the goal umpire.
How could he make a decision?
Well, he's got to. Here's the kick. 4 premiership points are riding on it. I think he's missed it. 1 point. The Bears have done it.
Round 11 was a day St Kilda and Tony Lockett won't forget. His season had already suffered one setback with the earlier suspension. But when the Burley spearhead went down against Footscray, St Kilda fans feared the worst.
Very gingerly putting that right foot on the ground.
There was more drama to follow when Lockett hobbled into hospital to have his ankle checked. Unaware television news crews were on his trail. After taking a tumble, an obviously distressed Lockett took out his frustration hurling his crutches like toothpicks in a bid to maintain his privacy. When things cooled down, his father Howard provided an explanation.
Sorry about that. I hope you all understand, you know, the pressure we've been under, and he's not that sort of guy, I can tell you that.
Richmond, who had won only 2 games in the first half of the season, caused the boil-over of the year in round 12 when they defeated Carlton at the MCG.
Mitchell is gold. Up to the 50-metre mark, out comes Dennis. There's the siren. Richmond have won it.
When the final siren sounded, the Tigers jumped for joy, literally, in the case of Peter Wilson. Carlton's Stephen Silvani took the mark of the year with this incredible leap in round 14.
What a mark.
He was up there for a week.
But there were some more great grabs in 1988. Dermot Brereton.
By Dermot Brereton.
Jason Dunstall.
To the goal. No,
Brereton again.
What a mark by Dermot Brereton.
Wayne Henwood.
7 metres. Still in the field of play. Oh, big time. What a mark by Henwood.
Jeff Rains.
Chip pass intended for Birds. Rains.
Paul Bryce.
Spargo goes with a high kick. It's going to go deep into the square, and it's a mark.
Dunstall.
Andrew Gowers.
Quick dolly, Mike. Oh, what a mark.
Stephen Stretch.
It's 2 on 1, and what a mark.
John McCarthy.
United was worthy of a final-size crowd. Whoa! A sensational mark by McCarthy.
There were few characters to rival Dermot Brereton and Bill Duckworth during the 80s. And in round 18, they decided to get to know each other a little more intimately.
You wouldn't like to meet either of them in a dark night and be unfriendly. And, well, there's a bit of humour in football.
They look like they're enjoying themselves.
It was going along just nicely until umpire Ian Clayton thought otherwise and penalised the Hawthorn forward, who seemed less impressed with the decision.
Oh, that's bad.
Well, I reckon they were both doing it. I don't think that's a poor decision.
Well, maybe Dermot took his chance.
Well, that's the siren, and that has cost Jason Dunstall a goal. It was an absolute certainty, and he still needs 3 for his century.
But as usual, Brereton wanted the last word. During the three-quarter time break, took a shortcut, leaving his unique stamp on the game. Hawthorn had not had a century goal kicker since the halcyon days of Peter Hudson. But Jason Dunstall was the Hawks' new goal-kicking machine. He notched his century in round 19 against Fitzroy, and Hawthorn fans applauded the feat in the traditional manner. The West Coast Eagles made the finals in only their 2nd season. Their elimination final encounter against Melbourne was a thriller.
Fisted down. Lovell is there. Williams is there. He needs support. Throws it out to line. He shoots. He goes. Melbourne are in front.
Gary Lyon put the Demons ahead in the dying minutes, but they had to withstand one last rally by the Eagles. And with 10 seconds remaining, Murray Renstead had the chance to pinch the game. Alas, his shot was offline. The Demons and their fans lived to fight another final.
There it is. Victory to Melbourne by 2 points.
Sydney Swans ruck rover Gerard Healy had proved to be the outstanding player of 1988. While the Swans missed the finals, there was some consolation when Healy won the Brownlow medal. Melbourne went one step better in 1988 when they reached the grand final. But after a lively opening, the Demons succumbed to the pressure applied by Hawthorn.
In comes Yates, and Steins gets rid of Ayres again. And at the back,
As usual, Dermot Brereton exerted most of the pressure, and he showed he could kick them from anywhere.
putting on the pressure.
Will he use a check side or a banana kick?
Straight.
He has.
Oh, what a goal!
And Jamie Morrissey was rewarded for this fine piece of play.
A stretch, a beautiful pick-up, but Morrissey took it off him. And Morrissey goes for goal, which he so richly deserves. What a beauty!
Paul Abbott booted 6 goals for the Hawks, who went on to win by a record margin of 96 points.
And that is a record margin in a grand final.
The only time the Hawks looked like being hemmed in was near the siren. But the coaching staff were soon out to join the celebration and enjoy Hawthorn's 7th premiership.
We're out of time in the grand final.
Football in February was again a familiar theme, and the 1989 night series saw Hawthorn bow out in unusual circumstances against the West Coast Eagles. The scores were tied at the end of normal time, and both sides kept playing until the first score won the game.
Anything will do! And that's the ball game!
Play the siren.
But eventually the Eagles bowed out of the series, and it was another triumph at night for Melbourne when they defeated Geelong in a close, hard-fought final. St Kilda and Carlton were locked in a thrilling battle at Moorabbin in round 2. But for the entire game, Tony Lockett had been standing in the way of the Blues, who held a 2-point margin late in the final term. When he took this mark with less than a minute to go, Lockett had already booted 9 of St Kilda's 12 goals. But his 10th clinched the game for the Saints.
43 seconds left on the clock. Possibly the last chance for St Kilda. They trail by 2 points. Tony Lockett.
One of the best matches of the decade was the Hawthorn-Geelong clash at Princes Park in round 6. And the Cats, with Gary Ablett running hot, bolted to a 49-point lead at half-time. But few sides would have been capable of mounting a comeback like Hawthorn. And the Hawks climbed off the floor to snatch an 8-point victory. The Cats and Ablett fought their way back in the next few weeks, and the Geelong star turned in the best individual performance of the year, booting 14 goals against Richmond at the MCG in round 9. A week later, they were back at the MCG against Collingwood. And again, Ablett's sheer brilliance left everyone, commentators included, speechless.
Oh, he's a light, Gary Ablett. Look at this. Here is the magician at work. He shoots towards goal. What more can you say?
St Kilda fans claimed this was the knockout blow of the year when Tony Lockett was booked for striking West Coast Eagles defender Guy McKenna and was suspended for 3 matches.
In fact, it could almost be a booking.
The repercussions of Warwick Kappa's last-minute mark and goal were felt by Carlton coach Robert Walls, who found himself dumped in favour of Alex Jesaulenko after the Blues lost to the Bears in round 10. Jesaulenko was back as the messiah at Carlton. And almost overnight, the Blues were rejuvenated, winning their first game under their new coach against the Sydney Swans. But the match was marred by several ugly incidents. And this clash between Greg Williams and David Rhys-Jones earned the Sydney Centremen a 5-week suspension in another trial by video case and cost the Carlton defender a broken jaw.
David Rhys-Jones and holding the jaw.
When South Australia came to the MCG on July 1, interstate football had finally returned to Victoria. The reputation of the South Australians as the #1 football power was on the line. So too was the reputation of Victoria, but with Jason Dunstall and Tony Lockett part of a formidable forward lineup, the South Australian defence was powerless as 91,000 fans soaked up Victoria's 86-point win.
4-1 Victoria, South Australia 1-2. The Vicks in attack. Lockett to Dunstall. Oh, he's gone.
There was one sour note when Andrew Collins brought down his Hawthorn teammate and South Australian opponent Tony Hall. Unfortunately, Hall buckled under the pressure of the tackle and his season ended with a serious knee injury.
And Hall looking in a spot of bother.
And he doesn't look too good. He's holding that knee.
The Brisbane Bears had a new coach by round 16 when Peter Knights was sacked and replaced by Paul Feltham. After St Kilda made a promising start through Mick Dwyer, the Bears hit back and started Feltham's VFL coaching career with a hard-fought win under the Carrara Lights. With Lockett's season interrupted through injury and suspension, Dunstall charged to the top of the VFL goal-kicking table. The Hawthorn champion and his side breathed a sigh of relief when his 100th sailed through against Carlton in round 18, giving the Hawks a 5-point win.
Well, what a way to get your 100th goal. Robert.
There were high stakes when Collingwood and Fitzroy met at VFL Park in round 20, with the winner taking a spot in the elimination final, which probably explained this tangle between Peter Dacos and Scott Clayton.
Running down the field.
It was a disastrous day for the Lions, who not only lost the game, but key forward Richard Osborne, who went down with a knee injury and was expected to be out of action for at least 12 months.
Osborne's still down. Mullane has got up.
Well, actually, it was an act of frustration by Osborne when he went over to try and get the ball.
The High Flyers were in action again in 1989. Nicky Winmar. Mark Bays.
Centre half forward for the Eagles, and what a mark.
Jason Dunstall.
Laffy, but Abbott has played exceptional.
Mick Dwyer.
He gets it again and kicks it high to full forward. And what a mark by Mick Dwyer.
David Honeybun.
What a leap by Honeybun.
Stephen Stretch.
Centre wing. Oh! Stretch!
Trevor Barker.
Oh, a long high one. Oh, what a mark!
Randall hooks it back in front of goal. Here's danger for North Melbourne. Lynch! A brilliant mark over the top.
After Collingwood made an early exit, Geelong and Melbourne flexed their muscles in the first semi-final, and it was a rugged encounter early in the game.
And there's a box on already.
By Geelong. Well, that was predictable because Geelong are going to be fired up.
But the Demons had no answer to that man Ablett, whose marking and goal-kicking prowess took the Cats into the preliminary final.
It is a mark. It's a mark, Pete.
After that goal kick by David Cameron down the half forward, Ablett again, creating opportunities, 25 metres out, 10 metres out, and beats it.
Essendon had trouble coping with the strength of Dermot Brereton, who simply demolished the Bombers in the second semi-final.
This allows Pritchard to come into an open goal. Darren Pritchard kicks. Is that a goal? Yes!
After a close first half, the Hawks turned on the power and cruised into their 7th straight grand final.
Dunstall. Oh! Pretty to watch. This for number 6 today. Yes.
Jason Dunstall, one of the success stories of the 80s, and so too are the Hawks as they prepare for their 7th successive grand final. And so as we prepare to head into the 90s, just a reminder that in Sports World tomorrow morning, from just after 10 o'clock, we've got 2 hours of football action, including the presentation to the Sports World Player of the Year. We'll also take a look at the year that was. It's certainly going to be a big week of football. Don't forget, you can catch it all here on 7, but for now, this is Sandy Roberts saying good night to you all.
Stay with us now for the spine-chilling mystery movie starring Clint Eastwood and Donna Mills in Play Misty for Me. Tomorrow night, take a look at the real-life human dramas that make up the baffling crimes facing police today. Something you have seen may help catch a criminal on Australia's Most Wanted. 7:30 tomorrow night on 7.